World War I, the Great War, was one of the deadliest and most defining conflicts in history. But what if I told you there's a tiny, independent city-state that played a key role in this global catastrophe, despite being geographically small and politically neutral? Yep, we're talking about the Vatican. Welcome to a deep explanation on this spiritual powerhouse got involved in the chaos of World War I. Let's set the stage. The year is 1914, and Europe is on the brink of war. Nations are locked in alliances, power struggles, and a rising tension that will soon explode into one of the bloodiest wars the world has ever seen. At the center of it all is Pope Benedict XV, the leader of the Catholic Church, whose diplomatic moves would shape the Vatican's role during the war. Despite the Vatican's official position of neutrality, Benedict's actions and inactions were far more consequential than they seemed. Now, the Vatican had a unique position going into World War I. Officially neutral, it wasn't bound to any nation's side, but neutrality didn't mean sitting on the sidelines. In fact, the Vatican was in an incredibly powerful position to shape public opinion, mediate peace, and influence diplomatic strategies, especially with so many Catholics in combat. Let's break it down. While major European powers, like France, Britain, Germany, and Austria, fought fiercely, the Vatican's neutral stance meant that Pope Benedict XV had the ear of governments across Europe. His position gave him influence, but also presented a delicate balance. Could he intervene? Could he push for peace without angering any of the warring factions? In 1917, Pope Benedict XV made a bold move by issuing what was known as the Peace Note. It was a diplomatic appeal for a ceasefire and negotiations to end the war. But here's the kicker, it was completely ignored. Why? Because by this point, the world had plunged so deep into conflict that peace seemed impossible, and nations had dug in their heels. Let's focus for a moment on the Vatican's relationship with the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. While Pope Benedict was determined to remain neutral, the Vatican had more influence with these nations than with the Allies, especially Austria-Hungary, which was a Catholic-majority empire. Austria-Hungary and Germany were quick to recognize the Pope's potential influence in moderating public sentiment. In fact, the Pope had been in touch with Austria's Emperor Franz Joseph I before the war even began, offering the Vatican's support to mediate peace. But there's a catch. The Vatican wasn't just supporting Austria-Hungary for ideological reasons. In a way, Pope Benedict XV hoped to protect the interests of Catholicism within the empire. The Catholic Church had deep ties to the Central Powers, and the Vatican wanted to ensure that the Church's influence in the region wasn't threatened by the war. Now, let's talk about the Allies, especially France and Britain. The Vatican's relationship with the Allies was a bit more complicated. France, a traditionally Catholic nation, was fighting alongside Britain and Russia, who were both more hostile to the Vatican's influence. Pope Benedict had a tough time balancing his relationship with the French government, which had a long-standing anti-Catholic stance. The French Republic was increasingly secular, and tensions between the Vatican and France ran deep. In fact, Pope Benedict's attempts to mediate peace often found resistance from France, where leaders saw him as too sympathetic to the Central Powers. Despite these challenges, the Pope managed to make some headway with individual leaders, including the British, although much of his peace diplomacy was undermined by the broader geopolitical struggles. His calls for peace were rejected, in part because military leaders and governments had already committed to total victory. While the Vatican's attempts to negotiate peace were largely ignored, Pope Benedict XV didn't remain idle. He was deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis unfolding across Europe. Millions of people were dying in battle, suffering from hunger, and enduring unimaginable hardships. The Vatican became a hub for humanitarian efforts. Benedict urged priests, nuns, and lay people to provide aid to the wounded and the displaced. Religious orders worked tirelessly to care for soldiers, provide medical care, and offer solace in the trenches. The Church also helped smuggle medical supplies and food to civilians trapped in the war zones.
Pope Benedict's voice was one of compassion in the face of unprecedented suffering. Despite the political turbulence, the Vatican's humanitarian efforts provided a glimmer of hope and humanity during one of the darkest chapters in history. When World War I finally ended in 1918, Europe was left shattered, and the world had forever changed. The Vatican's role, though limited in preventing the war, left an important legacy. Pope Benedict XV calls for peace, although ignored at the time, set the stage for future efforts in diplomatic mediation and humanitarian intervention.